Hello and welcome to this episode of Geopolitics with Swasti with our consulting editor and foreign policy expert, Swasti Rao. In this segment, we take questions from our members on anything and everything that's happening across the world so we can get Swasti's insights on why they're happening. So I thought this would be a good place to start. You just got back from Ukraine. It's the third anniversary of the war. And one of our members at Pavan Kumar Balabama asks about the recent meeting between Macron and Trump when Zelensky came up. And he asks, there are rumors that Trump wants Zelensky out of office. So can you break this down for us?
Yeah, a loaded question. And yes, it's good to be back here. Good to be back, amidst all kinds of safety. But yes, Ukraine trip was great. And I'm sure this is going to come up again and again in the different answers across today's episode. Now, very quickly about France and the US. Now, just to give you a bit of a background, I know where this question is coming from. Actually, Vandana, France and the US, and especially since Macron has become the president, which is since 2017, they have not had a very, I would say, smooth relationship. And the point is very simple. France has always been pushing for strategic autonomy, and the US has, especially under Trump, has kind of ridiculed that, saying that what kind of strategic autonomy do you talk about? Because for your security, you're reliant on us and the NATO. For your cheap energy, you were reliant on Russia. And for your cheap manufacturing, you're reliant on China. So what kind of strategic autonomy do you talk about? And in 2017, 2018, things had gotten very bad between these two leaders. I mean, Donald Trump in the US, that was his first term, and Macron had just become president, and he's, known for his fiery temper and speeches and his French arrogance, okay, in many ways. And he actually went to the extent of calling a NATO brain dead. Okay, so that kind of created a bit of a rift, and ever since there is a perception that France doesn't really want to follow the US led order, etc. But then here is where I think we need to get some details right. You see, France is a member of the NATO, France is a member of the EU, and France has extremely close security ties both with NATO and the US. And in fact, in the last few years of the war, France under Macron has done a lot of changes also, to many of its laws, trying to bring it closer to the transatlantic alliance. So that particular question comes in a different, that particular NATO being brain dead and those tensions belong to a different context. And yes, France is known to pursue strategic autonomy because that is also rooted in their World War, experiences, because France has always looked upon itself as like an erstwhile empire, and they don't like to be followers. But it doesn't suffice to say that they are wanting to leave the NATO or something. They will never do that. Okay, so that's very quickly, that's a bit of a thing there. So the problem is more political, right? It's about who is there at the big table, and France would always like to be on the big table. Now, very quickly, I think you also need to know that the EU project is a Franco-German project. It's driven by the Franco-German engine. France being the biggest or relatively bigger strategic player there, and Germany being the bigger economy. But that's not the only strategic equation. It's also, there's something called the Weimar Triangle, and this has kind of revived after the Ukraine war, where France, Poland, and Germany come together for strategic discussions. So France likes to have its place at the high table. Similarly, you may not know, or you may know, I don't know, about the Normandy format talks, which were the only talks steered by France and Germany that Ukraine and Russia came face to face at, right? And the Normandy format talks were a kind of a diplomatic effort to avert war in East Europe. So, cutting a long story short, I want to say what I wish to explain to you here is that France's quest for always finding itself on the big table has been a very French thing. And French would always say that we are not born to be followers but leaders, but please take it with a pinch of salt. Now, very quickly, when you talk about Macron's visit to the White House, actually it has been rather successful, because when he was going, there was a lot of speculation about the fact that these two guys don't like each other, etc. But France, I think Macron did a very wise, clever thing by kind of, appeasing Donald Trump's ego to some extent, and on the other hand, also giving a very realistic picture of the European security order, of details on Zelensky, his credibility and legitimacy as a president. It all came in that context where Trump got angry and called Zelensky a dictator. So what I'm trying to say is that, in my opinion, that was a rather successful visit, because he was able to turn around a lot of things, and it was just a few hours after his visit, and when he sort of bid bid farewell and calling Donald Trump my friend Donald and all that, you saw that Donald Trump actually agreed to signing the reworked version of the minerals deal, which was different and much more fairer in many ways than the original one. And I've just written my column, Friday column, on that, so I urge you to also read about it. And very quickly on the question of frozen assets, yes, this is being discussed in Europe, but I personally think that it is way too, legislatively speaking, it's very complicated for Europe to liquidate the 300 billion worth of assets which are frozen. It is much easier for them to use the interest earned on them for Ukraine, okay, or put together a new aid package, because the kind of legislative hurdles that exist in liquidating that entire money is, I don't think that's really worth the trouble, because you also have member states like Hungary who are going to object to this. So that's that. And very quickly about Trump's statements on Zelensky, etc. I think if you've been noticing what Trump has been doing lately, he has done a complete turnaround on every single statement he has done. So, and right now, he's in fact also gone to the extent of calling the same President Zelensky the best president ever. From a dictator to a best president. I mean, it's very polemical. And then he's also, in one of the, breaking news that I was just checking, he also said that he will help Ukraine take back Mariupol. And Mariupol was one of the first cities that fell. So what I'm trying to say is that right now, if you take out that 1 week of extreme tension and stress that was there in the European capitals and very palpable, I think it's just what I have always argued, that it is in America's interest, commercial interest, to keep supporting Ukraine, and we will see a continuation there. So frankly, I mean, rapprochement between, say, Russia or the US, I don't see that happening at all. So let's not take Trump literally. Like I keep saying, we have to see what he really does, not what he says, because going by that, you will get bipolar disorder.
So at Anubhav Saxena asks about another rumor that the US may join the China-Russia bloc and abandon Europe. I also wanted to add a question from at Arunabha, who's also wondering about the fate of the EU. So can you unpack this for us, and also what are the ramifications for India?
Well, so in many ways, Anubhav, you can connect this also to the first answer that I just gave about how Donald Trump's turnaround has already happened. So for a while, yes, I had also argued that it did look that because he wants so bad to deliver on the promise of bringing the war to an end. So what he knew that he wanted a deal, but I don't think he really had the modus operandi to go about it, and then he was all over the place. Now, for a while, it did look as if he's sort of giving mixed signals. He's cozying up to both China and Russia. But if you carefully see, I don't think that he can really join the China-Russia bloc. In fact, a much more plausible strategy would have been to drive a wedge between Russia and China, which is not the same as joining the bloc. And I think to some extent, Trump was doing that, by legitimizing Russia, by trying to say that we want Russia back into the G7, etc., etc. So there was, you're right, that reading is correct, that he was probably trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. But frankly, I don't think it is possible, Vandana. And I don't see, the possibility, not only because of geopolitics, because geopolitics or diplomatic posturing is not the only reason here. See, what has happened in the 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine war is that Russia's dependence on China has been growing. And when we say dependence, we just don't mean, political endorsements. We also mean very technical stuff, like, for example, the fiscal dependence. So the Russian ruble is able to perform because of how the yuan and all the trade out there from China is helping it sustain, okay, in many ways. And then, of course, there are also Central Bank of Russia's policies which are helping. So fiscal dependence, or all the dual use technology that is coming from China, because Russia's cut off from the Western chips and semiconductors and circuits. All of that is now coming from China. Not just that, there's a very important part that often gets missed in these discussions, which is that, what is the real deal between Russia and China on this war in Ukraine? It's not gas, it's not oil, that's very obvious. The real deal is that the Russians have been giving China, and I mean the Chinese counterparts, first-hand information of how the American weapons are performing in a real-time war. And that sensitive information is the real deal. And this has been a problem. During Biden administration, there were congressional committees made over it. I have written about it. And that is basically what China is gaining from this. So this unfiltered, unfettered access to how the American weapons are performing in a real-time war, and then they are reverse engineering and doing all of those things. That is where this gets extremely technical. And it is not just about talking nicely to Russia to get it back into the Western fold. No, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. So I think from India's perspective, it is a good strategy to keep engaging Russia. But at the same time, one has to be very clear and very, I would say, aware of where those limitations are and what kind of convergence are we talking about. By the way, I think you should also know that just as we are having this discussion here, and Donald Trump made a complete turnaround on Zelensky and called him best president, Shoigu, okay, Sergei Shoigu, who was Russia's defense minister for the longest time, and then a couple of years ago he was changed from his post, and now he's heading the Russian Security Council. He replaced Patrushev actually. He is in China. And if you really see his statements, I mean, he has given very clear statements. The relations between China and Russia are at an unprecedentedly high level. These are statements given today as we are recording this session. Now, you tell me, how does this look a plausible enough situation for the US to drive a wedge? So ultimately, I think one needs to be realistic about these things, and one may want to do it. From India's perspective, we keep doing it, but at the same time, one has to be mindful of where the situation is really going.
Right. And the second part of this question, what does this mean about the fate of the EU?
Now, for the fate of the EU, now, as you know that it's an interesting time. Only today I was listening to Ms. von der Leyen's speech. The EU Commission chief, as well as the foreign policy chief, and their entire college of commissioners, which is 21 commissioners. In short, you can understand EU and its cabinet. They are in India, they're in New Delhi. And what it means for EU-India relations is that, see, the EU is also very nervous about Donald Trump's constant flippy floppy diplomacy. So there are a lot of convergences between India and the EU, and they should be working hard on that. And frankly, this particular visit has not been put together because Donald Trump is giving such a hard time to Europeans. This particular trip was declared and announced much before Donald Trump started doing all this. But the fact that Donald Trump has turned out to be so unpredictable has given another fillip to this particular visit. And key takeaways, I think we will see some development on the Trade and Technology Council that we have signed earlier. We will see some convergence on AIs, semiconductors. There is an MOU we've already signed. We've not done anything on it. And my theory for that is that because unless it is steered at the NSA level, which is why you see this very quick acceleration in these areas when it comes to the US and when it comes to the to the French. So you have to sort of steer it at the NSA level in order to sort of become like a strategic priority for India and the EU. But apart from that, I was listening to her speech, and then she was categorical in saying that of course the FTA talks are going to be there, but beyond that they are also willing to work on hybrid threats, on counterterrorism, on critical infrastructure protection. So they will bring a lot of their expertise from their own continent, especially in the Baltics, where the grey zone warfare is very rampant, and superimpose it on Indo-Pacific. In fact, she went to the extent of saying that she would like to develop a similar security relationship with India, the way they have with the EU, with Japan and South Korea. So I think, like I said, that there's a lot of geopolitical convergence on it, and I would hope to see more coming out in coming months.
Right. At Ravi89Rule asks, and I think this is an interesting question, why and how do middle powers like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and even small countries like Qatar, why is it that they seem to be able to wield so much more influence in mediation and negotiations between parties in conflict, while India has shown aspirations to play a larger role but has never actually been able to do it?
Hard-hitting question,
really
Ravi. Good question. Okay. Now, yes, I think it should be told at the outset that yes, indeed, there is a difference between a mediator, a balancer, a guarantor, all of that, because we keep hearing these things so much, especially in the times of war. Now, very quickly, of course, only big states can be guarantors, right? So who's a guarantor? Security guarantees, who's going to give? So let's not talk about that. Now let's talk about mediation, right? Now, smaller powers, in my opinion, do not really have that kind of strategic leverage. Okay. And their opinion doesn't really matter in the big game of the great power politics, etc. So they are consequentially hedging their bets, and yet they would like to do something, and that's where this particular space opens up, for them to mediate, etc. Now, for a relatively larger power like India, which is also regional power with regional aspiration, and I think a lot of global vision, with the
Right.
Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all the things that we stand for and espouse,
Yeah.
and being a democracy, being non-aligned traditionally, I think our opinion matters. Also because we are so many numbers, yeah, come on,
Yeah.
1.5 billion people, it matters, right? So, our opinion matters. We can play a role in shaping these outcomes. We have trust of all sides. Exactly. We take a lot of pride in saying it again and again from different, quarters. But I think that's where it ends, because it is theoretical. On a practical level, I mean, one doesn't see India doing anything that India should or could. And I'll give you a lot of examples about it. And especially talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, I have maintained from the very beginning, after the war started, I wrote a column for ThePrint.
Right.
Back then, I was only a columnist here. So I wrote a column and I said that India shouldn't be looking at total mediation. All these talks about bringing the war to an end, you can't bring the war to an end, right? But what you can do in the interim is that you can look for issues and prioritize those issues and go for limited or tactical mediation. Now, for example, now look at, of course, India doesn't have a peace plan. So we are not really getting into how the peace should look. That's what I said, bringing the war to an end. We can't do that. But for example, what we can do, we could have done, or we could have facilitated the prisoners of war exchanges. Recently, a prisoners of war exchange happened that was facilitated by UAE. Global South country, very good ties with India, also a consequential hedger, has not criticized Russia, just like us, but still the prisoners of war exchange swap, that swap was not facilitated by us, by UAE. Similarly, look at the recent talks which were conducted by Saudi Arabia, those between the Russians and Americans, right? I mean, wasn't India ideally positioned to do that too? But we did not even take an initiative. There was no discussion of what role can India play. India just steered clear. Okay. Not just that, remember the 4 peace summits that have happened for Ukraine war, right? The first one happened in Copenhagen. The second one happened in Riyadh against Saudi Arabia. The third happened in a tiny country like Malta.
Yeah.
The fourth happened in Switzerland, again a neutral country in Europe. India was present, but what did India do? Hardly anything. So what I'm trying to say is that these different examples of limited mediation or tactical mediation is when you're trying to bring down the overall suffering in a productive manner. India has taken so much pride in being a humanitarian actor, but frankly, what has India really sent to Ukraine? It's nothing. I mean, the Bhishma kids, when the Prime Minister went there, etc. I mean, look at the number of people that have died on both sides, right? And look at the role that we can play. We take so much pride in being a humanitarian actor. Dur daraz mein, if there is a earthquake, we are sending all of that.
We've
But
talked so much about our COVID vaccines, etc.
yeah, but when it comes to like tackling a real war, I mean, we are not even we are nowhere on the radar. Similarly, I mean, I have to give you this example because last year in December, Ukraine held what is called a grain initiative on food security. They did a very massive, and it was headed by President Zelensky. So I went to attend that personally, and most of the African countries were there. Most of the Latin American countries were there. The Middle Eastern countries were there. If they were not there in person, they had joined online. I mean, they had an address to give, because it was about food security, right? It is about the larger global South. It is about the larger, world hunger. And go back to our G20 declarations. Have we not made similar promises? But India had no presence, no voice. Okay. And what I'm trying to say is that in those ways, right, we have missed the bus of trying to emerge as a credible actor. We frankly right now have no skin in the game, whether we like to hear it or not. And it's the other smaller countries who have done much more, who have somewhere manipulated or used their neutrality in very productive ways. We have not used our neutrality in any productive way. We have said that we will give innovative solutions, but frankly, I don't see a single innovative solutions. Now, if you look at the Indian media narratives, of course, most of the media narrative is still a very la la land, oriented narrative. I mean, I wouldn't get into that. But if you genuinely genuinely ask me, tangibly speaking, what is
have
that
we
one
done?
small step that we have taken? There are so many children have been abducted. There are so many global initiatives going on all over the world, right? It's not just about European countries or America. There's so many countries in the world that are trying to bring back the abducted children, the kidnapped children. Where is India in that conversation? Nowhere. So I think we need to get a little bit real and accept that these are situations where we could have done a lot to shape the outcome. But all we chose to do was perhaps talk and talk and talk. And when the time to take action came, we were frankly nowhere there.
Yeah.
Can we still do something? Of course, because the war is going to go on. Okay. So I think there will still come many opportunities. And frankly, India is ideally positioned. India has the trust of both sides.
Yeah.
So it's not about political solutions. We have to come out of that high pedestal of always trying to give grand solutions. Maybe a grand solution is not working right now. Maybe a tactical solution will work. But we have to build our credibility to get there. So I think I would have a very strong view on this, because for the last 2 to 3 years, I've been waiting for that opportunity for India to rise up to the occasion, and I've frankly not seen it.
Wow, Swasti, yeah, that's actually a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to think about. India could be doing so much more, you're right. Siddharth Panigrahi wants to know about the German elections, which took place last week. And he asks, given the split preference between the East, overwhelmingly, which voted for the AFD with the far-right party, and the West, how would the new chancellor reconcile domestic audience to this anti-Russia narrative, higher defense spending, self-sufficiency? I think it comes back to a lot of what we were talking about the EU and their outlook towards Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, that's a fresh
Interesting way to put
question,
it.
yes. And I'm happy to see that you also have these very fine-tuned questions on very specific, countries. Now, very quickly, yes, in Germany there's been elections, and the alternative for Deutschland, which is AfD, has actually got 20% of votes, which has been pretty historic.
Yeah.
But the party that has won has been the CDU, the Christian Democrats. Now, if you understand the German elections well, and if you understand German politics well, actually in Germany it is very rare, almost impossible for one party to get a clear majority.
Yeah.
So Germany is forever mired into building
Yeah,
coalitions.
there are these
Okay,
grand coalition.
yeah, always building a grand coalition. So that's the German way in many ways. That's the first thing. The second thing is that leader of the CDU, that's Friedrich Merz, has already clarified that he is not going to enter into coalition with the second
With the
largest
AfD.
bigger with the AfD. So that gives that leaves room for the SPD again,
Yeah.
right? I mean, which is Olaf Scholz's party,
The
the outgoing
outgoing
chancellor.
chancellor.
Now, very quickly, the thing that looks certain is that there will be a coalition, and that coalition would not have AfD. Okay, but what we do not know is the exact contours of the coalition.
Right.
It'll take some weeks
Take a few
before
weeks.
they put it together. But what we also know is that there will be a marked shift from Olaf Scholz's security policy. Now, if you remember, Olaf Scholz had announced for a Zeitenwende, and he said that we are going to be spending 100 billion euros on our defense modernization. Nothing happened, out of that. But then Merz, as soon as he won the elections, he actually said that now we are looking for another Zeitenwende. And I actually tweeted and I said that enough Zeitenwendes, I mean, please don't give these empty promises, and you have to basically change the way you're spending, because the stringent debt break is the real reason why Germany is not able to alter its spending. Okay, and that is the reason why I think the government's hands are tied.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a misnomer to understand, a misnomer to interpret that there's no money. There is money, but then the constitutional breaks are so stringent that they are not able to borrow more. So Merz has certain plans for it. He's probably going to tax more. I mean, we have to basically see what really comes out of it. But frankly, there will be main shifts. There will be a shift in foreign policy. CDU has always lobbied for greater support for Ukraine. CDU has always criticized the Scholz government for not allowing the Taurus missiles for the fear of escalation. So we will see that changing. And in fact, just to give you a little bit of an insight into where this is going, Friedrich Merz has been a committed transatlanticist. Okay, and because of Donald Trump's flippy floppy and very uncomfortable and sometimes also full of lies kind of statements that he's been given on Europe. He also said that that is over, and we have to be more inward looking, and we have to look after our own security architecture. Now, very quickly, I don't think that this is going to happen overnight. Yes, bigger countries of Europe have to come together, which is already happening. So they are talking about like a rearmament bank. They are talking about, different ways of quickening their, accelerating their procurement process, etc. So all that is happening. It will take some time before us, before we start, understanding what are the areas in which those shifts are happening. Like I gave you broader contours and what really those shifts are all about. But for sure, this particular government is going to look quite different on a lot of matters, especially foreign policy and that. And I think you're right in saying that they will have a challenge in trying to put together the sentiment that has been manipulated by the far right. How they do it is something that only time will tell. But for sure, Mirza's commitment to really having a stronger Germany, we will see how that plays out. But I see a lot more support going into Ukraine and a lot more decisive, things happening with him. And thanks to Trump's pill.
Yeah. No, I actually wanted to add, we interviewed the German ambassador earlier today about his views on the German election. And he was saying similar things, that I think it's an uphill battle, but it looks like, they're headed to a coalition that will be looking after Germany's interests, significantly different, but Germany's interest. And this brings us to our last question for this episode. At Karthik Parashar asks about Tejas versus Rafale. He says, given that Tejas M1A will have Astra missiles, which is beyond visual range missiles, Tejas M2 will be even better. How big of a gap will then be left between a Tejas and a Rafale?
Now, first of all, I think it's good to have a question from Karthik Parashar, because I was just wondering, where are you, Karthik? Because you've been so consistent in asking questions. So good to see that Karthik is here. Now, your question is a good one. It's a technical question. I'll try to be brief so that you get the key takeaway. Now, in terms of a question, the Tejas Mk2 will be pretty similar in capabilities as a Rafale. But you mentioned air-to-air missiles, the Astra missiles, which are indigenously developed ones. Those are only one capabilities, frankly. I mean, when you're comparing fighter aircrafts, there's a whole range of factors that you compare. It's not just air-to-air missile is one, but then there's also range, there's stealth, the avionics, the electric warfare, air-to-ground capabilities, air-to-air capabilities, of course, what is the sensor integration, etc. All of those factors actually come together when you want to really genuinely compare, different aircrafts. And also remember that as we're talking right now, Rafale is a reality and Mk2 remains a promise. Okay, so it is prudent to compare them, but I think that comparison should come when the FOC arrives, which is that when the final operations clearance of Mk2 has arrived. I think then it is the right time for comparing them. I mean, right now you're comparing something which is reality or versus something which is on paper. But even if you want to only go by capabilities as they are promised, I think they're quite similar. And if you ask me my pick, I would say that we should definitely, if it is a reality, we should definitely focus and prioritize on the Mk2s, because they are going to be indigenous. We can scale production whenever we want. We can add any kinds of indigenous missiles on it as we want. We can develop the avionics, etc. And I've done a lot of work on, how we are trying to sort of make up for our shortfalls in the engine developments. So there are a lot of strengths that we have. So, and if we are able to put together the Mk2 in time, I think we should be prioritizing that. But for now, please remember that it remains a promise.
Got it. Well, on that note, I think today has been a really interesting discussion. Thanks, Swasti, for joining us. And thank you so much for watching. And please join us next week again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.